Hello my friends and welcome back to my channel. The new Avatar game is a very impressive looking game with the right hardware. And speaking about hardware, I was unfortunately not able to get an early access code for the PlayStation 5 or the Xbox Series. So this here is the PC version. Thank you very much Ubisoft for providing me with an early access code for the PC version. But keep in mind, the whole video is based on the PC version. So the good thing is that in regards of HDR, usually there is hardly or barely any difference between console and PC, usually, okay? So keep this in mind. All my findings, all my settings are based on the PC version, and as soon I get my hands on the console version and I find a difference in regards of HDR, I will let you know. So for now, we keep in mind all my settings, all my findings, the whole video is based on the PC version. Okay, and before we now start talking about HDR, I like to mention again how great this game is looking on my PC. I'm using a 4080 and I'm very happy with the performance and with the visual quality. I mean, this thunderstorm right now, what is going on the screen here right now, and I don't want to spoil it too much, but this is absolutely amazing. I mean, look at all the moving parts here and it just looks really amazing. I just hope that the console version is looking very similar, but to be very honest, this is absolutely impressive. So much detail, so many details actually on the screen. And again, performance right now, fixed 60 FPS with ultra details and of course DLSS in use, but it looks absolutely gorgeous. I really like it. And now let's talk about HDR. So the first thing what we need to understand is that Avatar does not support the HDR system level calibration in Windows 11, and most likely the same counts for the console version as well. But I can't verify this at this very moment. As soon I know if this game supports the HDR system level calibration on the consoles, I will let you know. But on the PC, it is not supported. And now let's talk about the display settings what we have in Avatar to change and adjust the HDR picture. And we have brightness setting, we have HDR toggle switch on and off, and we have the HDR peak brightness setting, and we have a HDR peak brightness user interface setting. But before I go any further, I like to mention this menu, these settings here, or those settings are actually very bad because there is no test pattern or calibration screen whatsoever. We have nothing, and it's not that we don't have space here to maybe have here a grayscale or whatever to adjust the brightness, or here to adjust the HDR peak brightness with HDRG enabled and stuff like that. I don't know. This is very lazy actually in my opinion. So, and I don't understand it because we have a lot of Ubisoft games actually where we have something like that already implemented. So why not just copy and paste? I don't get it. Anyway, this is very lazy and I don't like it. But nevertheless, let's start talking about what are those settings are actually doing in the game. And I would say we're starting with the HDR peak brightness user interface setting, because this one is the least important one, because you can change this as you like it. There's no impact in HDR whatsoever. All what this setting is actually doing is changing the brightness from the user interface from HUD symbols on the display. That's all. Okay, so set this up as you like it. The next setting what we're going to talk about is the HDR peak brightness setting, and this one is much more important because the HDR peak brightness setting is responsible for the maximum peak brightness in specular highlights. But now we have a problem because there's no calibration screen. So what to do? Because maybe you don't know what is the maximum peak brightness of your screen TV monitor. So my recommendation is actually go to the website RThings, because they testing a lot of monitors, a lot of screens, a lot of TVs, and maybe you're lucky and they tested your TV, your screen, your monitor as well. And all what you have to do now is read the test and find the section where they're actually testing and measuring the maximum peak brightness in the gaming mode. And usually they're testing or measuring a 10% white window, and this is very accurate when we're talking about the maximum peak brightness. So I would recommend to use the value for the 10% white window and put this value in the setting for the HDR peak brightness. The maximum peak brightness in specular highlights in the game Avatar is limited to maximum 5000 nits, but to be very honest, I think that's more than enough because there is no TV out there with a maximum peak brightness capability of 5000 nits, at least not that I'm aware of. I have to say that the maximum peak brightness setting in the game is actually very accurate. That means you set this value to 800, let's say for the LG CX, and the maximum peak brightness is roughly around 800. The same counts for, let's say, when you set this up for the LG G3, which has a maximum peak brightness from around 1500 nits. The game outputs now maximum 1500 nits. So this setting is actually pretty accurate. And last but not least, let's talk about the brightness setting. And this setting is responsible for the average picture brightness. So we can make the picture darker or much brighter. So the good thing is this setting is hardly or barely touching the maximum peak brightness in specular highlights. That means even you set this value to 0 or to plus 20, the maximum peak brightness in specular highlights is almost the same. On the other hand, I was hoping that with the brightness setting, and now we have to talk about the bad news actually, we have to talk about the HDR black level floor. So I was actually hoping that with the brightness setting, I would be able to correct the HDR black level floor, because unfortunately, Avatar has some sort of raised HDR black level floor all the time, regardless of what you set the brightness settings. There's always a HDR black level raise of around 0.05 nits, which is not too bad compared to other games like Starfield before the patch, but it's still not on a reference level like in Alan Wake 2. So this is really the bad news, because as we talked about in many videos already about contrast, about HDR, about what is the most important thing to have a great HDR picture. And we have actually two qualities to get a really good HDR picture. And this is shadow quality or very deep blacks, and of course very bright specular highlights. But the problem is now we don't have perfect OLED black in this game, because we have all the time a raised HDR black level floor. And the only way actually to make it a little bit better is with the fine-tuned dark area setting on the LG OLED TV or the shadow detail setting on the Samsung TV. But before me now talking about my recommended settings for the LG OLED TVs and my Samsung S95C, let's talk about HDR colors. And this is where I'm a little bit disappointed, because we're talking about a fantasy game, okay? So that means the developer, the creators would be able to change or to use a lot of HDR colors, but unfortunately I haven't found any trace or any evidence of BT 2020 color so far. The only color or HDR color, let's call it HDR color, what I was able to find is the DCI-P3 color space, but hardly used. And this is it's actually a very bad sign, because that means almost the whole game runs in the SDR color space, which is just a big waste, because again, this is just a fantasy game and they would be able to use a lot of HDR color space just for fun, but unfortunately nothing is done in this case. So very disappointing in regards of the HDR colors. I'm not saying that the game doesn't look good. It does look good, full stop. I really like the graphics side, I like the visual quality, but you would be able to do more in regards of HDR, especially when we're talking about HDR colors. And now let's talk about my recommended settings for the LG OLED TVs and the Samsung S95C, and most likely maybe also the S95P. And I like to start with general settings, because we have the maximum peak brightness setting and we have the brightness setting in the game, which is very much the same or almost the same for every single display. In regards of the maximum peak brightness setting, I already mentioned that if you don't know what is the maximum peak brightness capability or the maximum peak brightness of your screen, just visit rthings, the website, and maybe you're lucky and you can find out what is the maximum peak brightness of your screen. For the LG G2 here in my case, 1000 nits maximum peak brightness, very simple. For the LG CX, 800 nits. For the LG G3, 1500 nits. For my S95C, on the other hand, I would recommend to set this value to 1800 nits. Not because this TV is capable of doing 1800 nits, but there is no proper HDR support, and I would recommend to just set it to 1800 nits, because according to my experience, it's just a better way to do so. Or for all the other TVs, for all the other screens, for all the other monitors, again, check our things to make sure you get the maximum peak brightness out of specular highlights. And now let's talk about the brightness setting, and I mentioned already that this setting has hardly or barely any impact in the maximum peak brightness in specular highlights, which is absolutely fantastic. Unfortunately, it also has hardly any impact on the black level floor. So that's a problem, because even you decrease this value to 0, the HDR black level floor is still raised. Regardless of what monitor or screen or TV you are using, you can set this up as you like it. This value is absolutely up to you, because it's very hard for me to make actually a recommendation. The only thing what I can say that I found on my LG OLED TV, that with dynamic tone mapping on and with decreasing the brightness setting to around 5, I found that the picture has actually a little bit of a better contrast and also more punch. But on the other hand, I have to say, I haven't had any problems to play this game with HDR enabled and the brightness set to 10, because the factory setting is actually looking very nice in combination with HDR. But do me a favor, give it a try on the OLED TVs, on the LG OLED TVs. Try dynamic tone mapping on and reduce the brightness setting to around 5, and let me know what you think. And now let's talk about a very specific setting just for the LG OLED TV, the FTDA setting, the fine-tune dark area setting. And very important is to understand that in order to use the FTDA setting, you must enable VRR. Otherwise, the FTDA setting has no impact at all on the picture. And all what you have to do is then to change the FTDA setting according to the tone mapping format what you're using to play the game, because this is also very important. So let's say you use HDR, then the FTDA setting should be set to -6 for HDR. On the other hand, if you play the game with dynamic tone mapping on, set the FTDA setting to -13. So this is very important. Don't mix this up, because otherwise you would have a lot of HDR black level crush or black level crush in general if you now use HDR. So again, for HDR, set the FTDA setting to -6. For dynamic tone mapping on, set it to -13. And now let's talk about the S95C, and the game looks absolutely gorgeous on this TV. And I mentioned already, set the maximum peak brightness in the game to around 1800 nits, because I found this is the best value for this TV. So in regards of the specific settings, what we have on the S95C, and I like to show you this, to mitigate the HDR black level floor, we have actually the shadow detail setting. And what I found is that you should set this value to at least -3, because I found this is much better. Maximum -5, but I found -5 can be already a little bit too much. The difference between shadow detail setting on the S95C and the FTDA setting on the LG OLED TV is actually that this setting is also changing the brightness a little bit. I'm not quite sure if you can see this on your screen at the moment. When I'm increasing this and decreasing this, the whole picture is slightly changing. This is not the best solution, let's say like this, but that's the only solution what we have in the game or on the S95C to mitigate the HDR black level raise in this game. So on the other hand, what I found, and I failed my quest, I don't know why, probably because I'm not playing. Also what I found is HDR tone mapping between active and static on the S95C. There is not much of a difference, so feel free to use either static or active. So what is my summary now? What is my first impression from this game? And I have to say I like it actually. In regards of the visual quality, this game is really on a very high level. In regards of HDR, if we're just looking at HDR, it can be better. It can be better, okay? Don't get me wrong, it's on a average level, it's on a okay level, it's not outstanding. For sure not in regards of the HDR black level floor, because we have no reference HDR black level floor. But in regards of specular highlights, I can't complain, you know, because we have a lot of specular highlights sometimes, especially in the night. And I don't want to spoil it too much. You should experience this on your own. And yeah, again, in regards of the visual quality on my PC, this is just absolutely fantastic. And right now, fixed 60 FPS. It runs with a higher frame rate than 60 FPS, but right now fixed 60 FPS to make the recording a little bit better. Otherwise, it's too choppy. When you have 80 FPS or whatever, then the camera is actually struggling to record this in a proper way. This is amazing in my opinion, okay? So I'm a little bit disappointed when we're talking about HDR colors, because again, this is a fantasy game. And you know, they can make those blends, let's say, absolutely ridiculous colorful if they want to. You know, there is no need to keep it in the normal SDR range, let's say like this. But most of the game, unfortunately, is just mastered in the SDR range. That's how it is, unfortunately. This is a very big waste of opportunity. Let's say like this. Very lazy in my opinion. The same actually counts for the very lazy HDR settings menu, because not even a calibration screen or test pattern or whatsoever. So this is absolutely not understandable in my opinion. But this is something where maybe we have future patches, maybe we have updates, and we have a couple of calibration screens and whatsoever. In regards of HDR colors, there will be no update where we have more colors. This will not happen, but maybe in future games, okay? So I would like to see more HDR colors. Don't get me wrong, there's no must to have HDR colors, but especially in a game like this, where we are on which is a fantasy game, not a realistic game like Forza or something like that, okay? We can make these colors better, okay? More saturated, let's say like this, okay? But overall impression is still great in my opinion. The visual quality in this game is just amazing. I love how much details actually you have here. And again, the game runs absolutely flawless on my PC. Looking forward to test the console version as well. And I hope that we see a similar quality. I mean, I'm well aware that the console version will not have the same visual quality, but I hope we have something similar, at least a perfect stable 60 FPS mode. I hope this. In regards of, again, HDR, visual quality absolutely outstanding. HDR quality on an average to okay level, okay, unfortunately. Anyway, this game, in my opinion, from the gameplay, was to play. I'm very surprised. I like the gameplay, so you should check it out. Thank you very much for watching me, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.